Why are political rituals important? Because if we are polite to one another, encourages us to listen to one another. Whereas if you are breaking all of these rituals and you're not only not listening, you're just insulting everyone. Critique of power, when that power is being used to undermine moral growth. Hello, my name is Stephen Angle. I teach Chinese philosophy with a focus on Confucianism at Wesleyan University in the US. I'm really happy to be here at Y Studio talking about progressive Confucianism. So I think there's a widespread view that Eastern cultures and Western cultures are very different. If you think about one of the issues that people might immediately point to, our relationship to our parents, relationships to a student, to a teacher, in general, a younger person to an elder person. And if we compare across cultures, we honestly see both similarity and difference. But I think there is a degree of difference. Someone on a subway in Taipei giving up their seat for an older person to sit down is higher in Taipei than it is in New York City. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen in New York. There is a degree of difference. I do certainly think that there are differences. Even though it's normal for people in the US to care about their parents, I think that degree to which individualism and not really thinking about other perspectives, that's still very central to Western culture, to liberal values. It's difficult for an American liberal to talk about how our public culture, how our media, and so on are influencing other people. There's a very strong culture of rights to individual expression and rights to individual choices. There are very good things about that, but there's also a less good side. So problems like the kind of influence on young people's psychology, moral development, relationships with others that come from being always online. Now, a progressive Confucian is not going to rigidly insist that the state gets to decide what video games you can play. But the progressive Confucianism position is going to emphasize that we should pay attention to what's happening. I think thinking about how liberalism shaped Western politics is pretty straightforward. So liberalism is fundamentally about having opportunities for individuals in their private lives to do whatever they want as long as it doesn't harm other people. That kind of constraint. And so you get enormous variation, and it allows some space for very radical kinds of political ideologies to emerge. So that we can analyze for sure. I think the question of the role of Confucianism and progressive Confucianism in politics is harder to answer, because for the most part, I don't think that progressive Confucianism has had much of a role in politics. The reason is the public voices labeling themselves as Confucians that are trying to intervene in one way or another in political or social matters in the PRC, in Taiwan, are inevitably very conservative. The people who have more progressive views, they tend to have rejected Confucianism. They tend to identify as liberals. PRC context, as Marxists and so on, right? I mean, there's a different situation. And I feel like that is a failure of imagination. It is true that Confucianism, as I've been saying, does emphasize we have responsibilities to one another and so on. If you're somebody in a position of power, then it's easy to think that Confucianism is your friend. However, if you go back to the texts, if you look at what the Confucian philosophy really talks about, it talks as much about critique of power, when that power is being used to undermine moral growth. So this is a really important question with the American election coming up. I don't think there's a simple solution, but I do think Confucianism has something to contribute here. One of the most important Confucian concepts, but also often misunderstood, is the idea of ritual. All of the sort of norms that govern social interactions. So if you sit down at the dinner table with your family, and if everyone waits to eat before everyone sits down, that's a ritual. Whatever, and rituals can vary from one culture to another, and it's very important to how we come to be actual human beings interacting together in society. So, how does this relate to politics and polarization? The United States, over the last 15 years or so, there has been an increasing loss of the rituals surrounding politics. One of the really memorable moments took place, I think it was 2006, if I remember correctly, when then President Obama was giving the State of the Nation, and a Republican legislator shouted, "You lie," in the middle of his speech. There'd never been anything like that before. If it's a Democratic president and you're a Republican, maybe you don't clap very much. Maybe you just sit there and look mad. But that sort of interruption, and really rude interruption, was unheard of. And at the time, that person got a lot of criticism. Now, fast forward another 10 years, Donald Trump is elected in 2016. He clearly has done more than anyone to just shred our norms. Why are political rituals important? Because if we are polite to one another, it encourages us to listen to one another, right? They nudge us, they encourage us by their structuring, if they're good rituals. Whereas if you are breaking all of these rituals, and you're not only not listening, you're just insulting everyone. There's also the role modeling effect. Other people to insult others instead of listening to them. I think that that finding a way to recover the role for rituals, good rituals, there can be bad rituals, and those we should criticize. But I think that for finding a way to recover those rituals in our public society, in our political society, is one part of an answer. Well, there are many problems. One of the biggest problems that we face, of course, is climate change. The question, why should we care? Why should we care about the non-human world? Their Confucian idea that I think I mentioned in an earlier lecture, that we form one body with all things, that our relationships aren't just relationships to other humans, but our relationships are relationships to the built environment that we live in. So that's a great point of departure for thinking about why we should care. I think that there's a sort of twofold situation. On the one hand, explicit appeals to Confucianism in terms of how to deal with political or social issues, how to deal with individual relationships, and so on. However, they also have what I, as a scholar of Confucianism and an advocate of progressive Confucianism, think is a somewhat mistaken understanding of Confucianism. And so this overly rigid, overly conservative understanding of what Confucianism can be is a problem rather than a solution. So it seems to me that in the US, I'm not imagining that anytime soon there's going to be a huge movement of American Confucianism. Probably not. I think the opportunities in Korea are different. The opportunities for progressive Confucian voices actually having an influence in Korean society. It's going to depend on individuals actually engaging with these ideas. It's going to depend on people saying, this is Confucianism, right? Not, as it were, my grandfather's Confucianism, right? But this is live Confucianism today.